Welcome to Chapter 2 of A Modern Pilgrim's Progress, my long journey in discovering non-duality. This is George Shears, and if you happen to have missed the first chapter, you will find it on my YouTube channel. Shortly after completing the first grade at a one-room country school with flying colors, I was uprooted from my nurturing abode where I had flourished for the first 7 years of my enchanting life. This occurred as a result of my mother's marriage to my stepfather and our relocation to his house about 5 miles away. The very rustic 4-room log house that I had initially shared with my family had become a very secure second womb for me. We lived next to a pristine small lake where I spent endless delightful summer hours fishing for panfish. Retrospectively, I recognize that this was my original introduction to meditation that I would ardently resume again several decades later. Since there were very few other children in that isolated setting, my main playmates were our dogs, a cat, some pet chickens, a couple of cows, and some pigs. I also raised some baby ducklings one summer. Tragically, however, a predatory owl devoured all of them one dark night, presenting me with a second early lesson in dealing with major grieving. My brother Vern also had a very old horse, Fred, to whose secret and tragic death I was traumatically exposed a couple of years later while Vern was away in the army. More on that later. This very simple and frugal lifestyle laid a preciously important foundation for my spiritual journey that would follow. My first very special and beloved pet was Annie, named after the heroine Little Orphan Annie in my one and only very special book. She was a uniquely rare purple-colored chicken that I gladly adopted from a neighboring family to save her from being pecked to death by their other chickens. She became my devoted companion for the next few years, laying an egg nearly every day. She willingly accommodated my budding psychology interest by letting me quote unquote hypnotize her by immobilizing her on her back. She would then remain catatonic in this position before groggily regaining her chicken composure. Very poignantly, at the end of her long life, she managed with great difficulty to come to where I was sitting on our back porch, where she then collapsed and took her last breath. My dearest mother, bless her ever-loving heart, cooked all of our meals and baked abundant loaves of delicious homemade bread on a massive wood-burning stove. She also used it to heat the water, to wash all our clothes, laboriously using a simple tub and washboard. I accompanied her in harvesting large quantities of wild raspberries and other wild fruit, lavishly provided by Mother Nature on the land around our home. She commonly preserved 100 quarts of raspberries as well as a similar quantity of peaches in the summertime. This and many other very important learning experiences with nature instilled in me a firm foundation for recognizing our seamless unity with Mother Earth, which is one key feature of non-duality. In marked contrast to the great security and serenity of my first 7 years, the next segment of my life included a high degree of chaos and traumatic anxiety, occasioned mainly by my stepfather's chronic addiction to alcohol. He was equally addicted to long hours of hard work, cutting pulpwood, which was about the only way to earn a living in northern Minnesota in that era. He oscillated very regularly, but also unpredictably, in being compulsively controlled by these two very insidious quote unquote demons. Parenthetically, that later as a psychotherapist, I came to define as quote unquote internal tyranny. During those very stress filled years, I developed what I now recognize as an anxiety disorder that was largely fostered by a continuous fearful anticipation of his next inevitable episode of binge drinking that would typically last for nearly a week. During these episodes, he would repeatedly come home very late at night in an extremely drunken state, accompanied by much anger and verbal abuse toward my mother. Not infrequently, he would also threaten suicide with guns that were readily available. I was subject to another brief but very significant source of traumatic experience early in that era. It has remained as a skeleton in my family closet to this day. It involved the secretive sacrifice of my brother Vern's old horse, Fred, who had moved with us from Cedar Lake. Most likely, due to the cost of his upkeep, it was decided to sell him to a Minnesota mink farm where his body would be used as food. Knowing that this would be absolute anathema to Vern, who was deeply compassionate toward all animals, and especially to Fred, I understood that he would be told that Fred had just died naturally. What was by far the most traumatic about this subterfuge, however, is that the mink farm owners who bought him came to our property where they killed him and harvested his flesh behind our long chicken coop. The remnants of that awful atrocity remained there for many months thereafter. Although hidden from public view, I was very painfully and chronically reminded of them. Worst of all, I dutifully and tragically participated in withholding this dark secret from Vern. In my child's mind, I understood that I was helping to protect him from the terrible anguish he would feel if he learned of it. And that will be the end of chapter 2. I will continue with my story in chapter 3. Thank you very much for listening.